The conference chamber floated in neutral space, a perfect sphere of crystal and light that had witnessed 10,000 years of diplomatic solutions. Ambassador Sarah sat at the human delegation table, her hands folded calmly on the polished surface, watching the council representatives filter in through their various entry ports. They arrived last, as they always did, their chitinous frames gleaming under the chamber's soft illumination. Sarah had been doing this job for 6 years now. 6 years of learning how the Galactic Council really worked, how decisions were made in the spaces between official meetings, how economic pressure shaped justice more than any written law. Today would test everything she had learned. The Council recognizes the human petition regarding territorial dispute 7743H, the speaker announced, his translation matrix converting his chemical signals into words every species could understand. The Dominion has submitted counterclaims to the 3 contested colony worlds. Both sides have presented evidence. The Council will now deliberate. Sarah knew it was already over. She had watched the private meetings, tracked the flow of trade credits to key council members, seen how the Dominion had spent months building support before they ever moved a single ship toward human space. The 3 colonies in question, New Mumbai, Nova Kyoto, and New Lagos, held a combined population of 47 million humans. Families who had traveled across the stars to build new homes, farmers and engineers and teachers and artists who wanted nothing more than to live their lives in peace. They wanted the worlds for their mineral wealth, simple as that. The deliberation took less than an hour. Sarah had expected it to be quick, but the speed still stung. The speaker returned to his position at the center of the chamber. The council has reviewed all evidence and arguments. We find in favor of the Dominion. The territorial claims are recognized as valid under Section 47 of the Colonial Expansion Protocols. The human settlers on these worlds will be given 6 months to relocate. This decision is final. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species nodded or made their various gestures of approval. This was how things worked. The system was stable, peaceful, orderly. No one had fired a weapon in council space for 3,000 years. Sarah stood slowly. The other human delegates stood with her, 9 men and women who had spent months preparing arguments that ultimately meant nothing. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could, studying the faces of beings from worlds she would never visit. "We came here because we believed in your system," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear, and the translation matrix carried it to every corner of the sphere. "We thought this was a place where justice mattered more than power, where law protected the weak as well as the strong. You have shown us what your system truly values." The representative made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. "Learn your place, humans. You are children in this galaxy. Accept what cannot be changed." Sarah gathered her papers, an old-fashioned habit from a species that still valued physical documents. "We will accept what must be," she said. "Thank you for your time." The human delegation left through their designated port. Behind them, the council moved on to the next item on their agenda, a trade dispute over agricultural patents. No one gave the humans another thought. 3 days later, Sarah stood in the communications center aboard the embassy station in orbit around Council Central. The message she was about to send had been written weeks ago, approved by Earth's government, and held in reserve in case the Council ruled against them. She had hoped she would never need to send it. She transmitted the message across every major communication channel in human-controlled space. Military frequencies, civilian networks, colony broadcasting stations, even the quantum relay points that connected Earth to her most distant settlements. It was a simple message, just 3 sentences long. "The Council has ruled against us. The system has failed. Execute Protocol Nemesis." Protocol Nemesis. Sarah had been briefed on it when she first took this assignment. Every human ambassador learned about it, studied it, prayed they would never have to invoke it. It was humanity's insurance policy, the contingency plan for the day when peaceful coexistence stopped being an option. Across human space, fleet commanders opened sealed orders. Military bases that officially didn't exist came online. Shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and deep space construction platforms activated production lines that had been maintained in standby mode for decades. Weapons systems were armed, crews were briefed, and ships that had been disguised as mining vessels or research stations dropped their camouflage and revealed their true nature. Humanity had never disarmed. They had simply learned to hide. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Elizabeth sat in the operations center, buried 3 miles beneath the Atlantic Ocean. She was 78 years old, a veteran of the Mars Rebellion and the Titan Independence War, conflicts from humanity's chaotic expansion into their own solar system. She had been chosen to command Earth's Home Defense Force specifically because she remembered what war looked like when humans fought humans. She understood the cost. "Status report," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a lifetime spent in uniform. "All fleets responding," her tactical officer reported. "Ghost Fleet Actual reports full readiness. Hammer Group is moving to staging positions. Anvil Force is loading assault transports. We can be ready to move in 48 hours. "Make it 72, said. "We do this right. We give them every chance to reconsider." "Admiral, with respect, the Council has already made their decision." "Not the Council," said. "The people living on those worlds. The colonists who moved there thinking the land was legally theirs. We're not monsters. We give everyone time to get clear." She opened a direct line to the communication division. "Draft a message. Broadcast it on every frequency we know the monitor. All personnel, military and civilian, are to evacuate the contested zones. They have 72 hours. After that, we're coming to take back what's ours." The message went out within the hour. It spread across the galactic networks like wildfire. Human forces issuing an ultimatum, humanity threatening military action. It seemed impossible, absurd even. The humans had been in space for barely 200 years. They had fewer than 50 colony worlds, a fraction of what the major powers controlled. They were newcomers, barely worth noticing on the galactic stage. The Dominion received the message and called an emergency session of their military council. The High Commander, a massive name who had led fleets in border disputes with minor species, read the human transmission with something approaching amusement. "They threaten us. They dare." He activated his communication array, broadcasting a response that would be picked up by monitoring stations across 3 sectors. "Humanity speaks of taking what is theirs. We stand on this land by right of council law. We have fleets, armies, weapons systems developed over 10,000 years of civilization. Come and move us if you can." The message ended with footage of forces on New Mumbai, their tanks rolling through the streets of the capital city, their flags flying over government buildings that humans had built with their own hands. Civilians walked through human neighborhoods, examining homes they planned to claim. The occupation had already begun. Across council space, the response to the human ultimatum ranged from confusion to mockery. The Confederacy issued a statement calling human threats regrettable but understandable given their youth as a spacefaring species. The Vortex Collective simply noted that violence was the last refuge of the primitive mind. On thousands of worlds, people laughed at the idea of humans going to war. War was extinct. War was a relic. War was what savages did before they learned civilization. Only a few voices expressed concern. The Million Republic, a small cluster of 6 worlds that had suffered under expansion before, sent a private message to the human embassy asking if the evacuation order was serious. Sarah replied with a single word: "Yes." The Millions quietly pulled their diplomatic staff from space. 72 hours passed. They did not evacuate. They reinforced their positions instead, moving more troops and equipment to the contested worlds. High Commander appeared in a broadcast standing in front of a cultural center under construction on Nova Kyoto, built on the ruins of a human park. "We are here to stay. Let the humans come. Let them learn what happens to children who challenge their elders." In the operations center beneath the Atlantic, Admiral watched the broadcast with tired eyes. She had hoped, somehow, that it wouldn't come to this, that someone would see reason, that diplomacy would find a way through. But hope wasn't a strategy, and humanity had learned long ago that sometimes the only language power understood was power itself. "All fleets," she said into her command channel, "execute jump protocols, target all 3 contested systems. Rules of engagement are authorized. We are going to war." Across human space, ships that had waited in the darkness powered up their drives. Jump coordinates were calculated and locked in. Marines checked their weapons. Pilots ran through pre-flight sequences. Gunners loaded ammunition that used chemistry and physics that predated Council technology by. These were not the sleek vessels common to galactic travel. These were warships, pure and simple, designed for one purpose, and built by a species that had nearly destroyed itself learning that purpose. The jump coordinates aligned. The drives engaged. And in flashes of twisted spacetime, humanity's fleets vanished from their staging areas and reappeared at the edges of 3 systems where their people waited under occupation. The sensors detected the jump signatures immediately. Alarms sounded across military installations. Crews rushed to battle stations. Commanders barked orders in a dozen different languages. This was it. The humans had actually come. High Commander watched from the bridge of his flagship as the tactical display populated with contact markers. Human ships, dozens of them, emerging from FTL at precisely calculated positions around the system. He studied their formations with growing confidence. They were outnumbered. Their ships were smaller than standard Council military vessels. They were maintaining radio silence, not even bothering with the traditional challenges and threats that usually preceded military action. "They don't know what they're doing," his tactical officer said. "Look at those formations. No elegance, no artistry, just blunt positioning." Gave the order. "All ships, intercept and engage. Show these primitives why the Council has maintained peace for 3,000 years." The fleet moved forward, their shields glowing with defensive energy, their directed energy weapons charging for the opening salvos. They expected a traditional engagement, the kind that appeared in historical records from the last age of galactic conflict. Energy exchanges at long range, shield attrition, careful maneuvering for advantage. War as it had been conducted since before humanity discovered fire. What they got instead was something the galaxy had forgotten was possible. The human ships opened fire at maximum range. Not with energy weapons, but with solid projectiles. Tungsten slugs accelerated to relativistic speeds by magnetic coils that ran the length of their hulls. The shields, designed to deflect and absorb energy, offered almost no resistance to solid matter moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The first destroyer simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, shields glowing, weapons charging. The next moment it was an expanding cloud of debris and superheated gas. 3 more ships died in the opening salvo before they could even process what was happening. "What was that?" roared. "What are they using?" "Kinetic weapons, Commander," his sensor officer replied, his voice shaking. "Solid matter at extreme velocity. Our shields aren't designed to stop physical projectiles. Nothing in Council space uses physical projectiles." "Then adjust shield frequencies. Angle the deflectors." "Commander, it doesn't work that way. These aren't energy weapons, they're just throwing rocks at us. Very fast, very heavy rocks." The human fleet pressed forward, their guns firing in synchronized patterns. The ships tried to return fire, their energy beams lancing out across the darkness, but the human vessels were heavily armored with layered plating designed to absorb and dissipate energy. The beams scorched their hulls, melted sections of armor, but failed to achieve killing hits. Meanwhile, every time a human ship fired, a vessel died. Watched his fleet disintegrate with growing horror. This wasn't how war was supposed to work. This wasn't elegant or civilized. This was brutal, efficient, mechanical. The humans weren't even trying to disable ships for capture. They were simply destroying them, moving through his formations like farmers harvesting grain. "Fall back," he ordered. "Retreat to planetary defense positions." But retreat wasn't simple when facing enemies who understood momentum and vectors better than honor and tradition. The human ships had positioned themselves perfectly, cutting off escape routes, herding the fleet into kill zones where multiple ships could target the same enemy simultaneously. It was coordination born from centuries of human warfare, strategies refined in conflicts where defeat meant extinction. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the fleet was gone. Simply gone. 74 ships reduced to floating wreckage and distress beacons. The human fleet had lost 9 vessels, damaged another 20, and established complete orbital superiority over all 3 contested worlds. On the surface of New Mumbai, occupation forces looked up at the sky where human ships now circled like birds of prey. Drop pods began to rain down, each carrying Marines in powered armor who had trained for every type of combat humanity could imagine. The occupation was about to become a liberation. In the council chamber, an emergency session convened. Representatives from 300 species watched the battle footage in stunned silence. The images showed a type of warfare they thought extinct, a brutal efficiency that spoke of experience and careful planning. This wasn't a primitive species lashing out in rage. This was a military machine that knew exactly what it was doing. Ambassador's hologram appeared before the council. She looked as calm as ever, but there was something different in her eyes now. Something the council members couldn't quite name, though later they would realize it was the look of someone who had stopped playing by rules that were never fair to begin with. "We didn't forget how to fight," she said quietly. "We just hoped we wouldn't have to. You were warned. The roar was human. The warning was clear. Now we're taking back what's ours." The hologram faded. The council sat in silence, and for the first time in 3,000 years, they understood that their age of guaranteed peace might be coming to an end. The council's emergency session stretched into its 3rd day. The chamber that had hosted calm deliberations for now echoed with raised voices, frightened questions, and demands for action. The footage from the engagement played on repeat on every screen, analyzed by military historians who had to dig through ancient archives to find comparable tactics. They used mass as a weapon, one analyst explained to a room full of representatives who had never heard such a thing. Accelerated solid matter to relativistic speeds. The kinetic energy alone is devastating. Our shields aren't designed for this. Nothing we've built in 3,000 years is designed for this. The delegation demanded intervention. High Commander, broadcasting from a bunker on New Mumbai as human Marines advanced through his defensive lines, appealed directly to the Council's sense of order. "This is barbarism. This is chaos. If you allow humanity to succeed through violence, you destroy everything the Council stands for." Several species agreed. The Confederacy proposed immediate military action. The Vortex Collective suggested economic sanctions. The Million Republic, notably, remained silent. But others hesitated. They had watched the battle footage. They had seen how precisely the human fleet moved, how efficiently they destroyed opposition, how completely they dominated the engagement. And perhaps more importantly, they had started accessing human historical databases, reading the records that humanity had freely shared when they joined the Council, records that most species had dismissed as barbaric curiosities. A junior analyst from the assembly brought a report to her superiors. She had spent 40 hours reading about human history, and what she found terrified her. They fought a war that killed 70 million of their own species. Then they did it again, this time with nuclear weapons that could have ended all life on their planet. They came within minutes of total self-annihilation. They know what war is. They lived it. They survived it. And they've been preparing for it ever since. The report spread through the Council's intelligence community like a virus. Species after species began to understand that humanity wasn't primitive. They were experienced. They had mastered violence in a way the galaxy had forgotten was possible. On New Mumbai, the occupation collapsed in less than a week. The human Marines moved through the cities with practiced efficiency, securing neighborhoods, protecting civilians, and disarming forces who had no idea how to respond to an enemy that understood urban warfare. The soldiers had been trained for garrison duty, for ceremonial displays, for the kind of low-intensity peacekeeping that the galaxy considered military action. They had never faced an enemy that knew how to clear buildings room by room, how to use cover and concealment, how to coordinate fire teams and air support. The on Nova Kyoto and New Lagos saw what was happening and began surrendering before human forces even landed. Entire garrisons laid down weapons rather than face enemies who fought like nothing they had ever seen. Through it all, the human forces followed strict rules of engagement. Civilians were protected. Surrendering enemies were treated according to codes of conduct that predated humanity's space travel by centuries. Property was secured rather than destroyed. The humans weren't there to conquer or punish. They were there to reclaim what was theirs and remove the occupiers. But the galaxy was watching, and what they saw wasn't just a military victory. They saw a species that understood violence so completely that they could apply it with surgical precision. It was terrifying in a way that Council species had no framework to process. The Dominion called for a coalition. 6 major species answered. The Vortex, the Unity, the Compact, the Sovereignty, and the Federation all committed military forces to what they termed a peacekeeping operation. Their stated goal was to enforce Council authority and restore order to the contested zones. Their actual goal was to make an example of humanity before other species got similar ideas. The coalition fleet assembled at a neutral staging point, 300 warships representing the combined military might of species that had dominated Council politics for centuries. It was the largest military mobilization since the Council's formation. The fleet commanders held a joint briefing, reviewing their intelligence on human capabilities and planning their strategy. They rely on kinetic weapons, the admiral explained. We've modified our shield configurations to provide better protection against solid matter. We have a numerical advantage of 5 to 1. We will approach the human positions in overwhelming force and demand their immediate withdrawal from the contested systems. The other commanders agreed. This was a show of strength, a demonstration that the Council's authority could not be challenged. They expected the humans to retreat when faced with such overwhelming numbers. After all, humans were still relatively new to space. Surely they would recognize the futility of continued resistance. The coalition fleet jumped to the contested zone and established positions in the neutral space between the recovered colonies and Council territory. They sent a message to the human forces demanding immediate withdrawal and return to pre-conflict status. The deadline was 24 hours. The human fleet didn't withdraw. Instead, they repositioned, forming a defensive perimeter around the 3 systems. Admiral, now commanding from the bridge of the flagship Defiant, received the coalition's ultimatum and read it carefully. 5 to 1 odds, she said to her staff. Could be worse, could be 10 to 1. Admiral, we can't win a direct engagement against those numbers, her tactical officer said. Even with our weapons advantage, they'll overwhelm us through attrition. Maybe, said, but they don't know that for certain, do they? They've seen what we did to but they don't know our full capabilities. They don't know what else we have in reserve. They don't know if we have allies they haven't identified. They're operating on incomplete information just like we are. She opened a channel to all human ships. All commands, this is actual. We hold position. Maintain defensive formation. Do not fire unless fired upon. We're not here to start a war with the entire galaxy. We're here to protect what's ours." Then she did something the Coalition didn't expect. She started broadcasting information on all frequencies. Not threats, not demands, but data. Tactical analysis of every ship in the Coalition fleet. Identified weaknesses in their shield configurations. Projected casualty rates for various engagement scenarios. Detailed breakdowns of what a full-scale battle would cost both sides. And then came the videos. Footage from human history. The trenches of the First World War. The nuclear detonations of 1945. The burning cities of the Resource Wars. The Mars Rebellion, where humans fought humans in vacuum with weapons designed to puncture habitat domes. The Titan Independence War, where both sides used nuclear weapons in the rings of Saturn, contaminating them with radioactive debris that would remain dangerous for centuries. Every ship in the Coalition fleet received the transmissions. Every commander watched the footage. They saw what humans did to each other when survival was at stake. They saw the scars humanity carried from their own violent past. They saw a species that understood war not as an abstract concept, but as lived experience. "This is what we know," Admiral said in a broadcast that reached every ship in both fleets. "This is what we've survived. We didn't come to your council because we were weak or naive. We came because we were tired of this. Tired of fighting, tired of killing, tired of looking at ruins and counting our dead. We thought maybe there was another way. Your council showed us there isn't. Not when the powerful can take what they want and call it legal." She paused, looking directly into the camera. Her face was lined with age and experience, the face of someone who had seen things that no one should have to see. "You outnumber us 5-1. You probably think that's enough. Maybe it is. But before you move forward, ask yourself this: what's your casualty projection? 10%? 20? What number of your people are you willing to sacrifice to enforce a council ruling that most of you know was wrong to begin with? Because we've already made our calculation. Every human in this fleet volunteered knowing they might not go home. We're not asking for your approval. We're not asking for your permission. We're giving you a choice. Back down or learn what happens when you push a traumatized species into a corner." The broadcast ended. The two fleets sat in tense silence, weapons ready but not firing. Hours passed. The Coalition commanders held emergency consultations. Their tactical officers presented worst-case scenarios that looked increasingly grim the more they studied human capabilities. Behind the scenes, the smaller council species began making their voices heard. The Million Republic formally announced they would not participate in any action against humanity. They published records of their own disputes with the Dominion, cases where council rulings had favored the powerful over the just. Other species began to speak up, seeing in humanity's defiance an opportunity to challenge the existing power structure. The Assembly released a detailed analysis of the original council ruling on the contested colonies. They demonstrated with embarrassing clarity how economic influence had shaped the decision. They showed the private meetings, the trade deals, the careful manipulation of council procedures. The ruling hadn't been about law, it had been about power. Public opinion across council space began to shift, not because species suddenly loved humanity, but because they recognized the pattern. How many other rulings had been shaped by economic pressure? How many other weaker species had been told to accept injustice for the sake of stability? Humanity's resistance wasn't just about 3 colony worlds. It was about whether the Council's rules meant anything at all. In the Coalition fleet, cracks began to form. The Unity commander sent a private message to his government questioning the mission. The compact recalled 2 of their squadrons, citing technical concerns. The Federation announced they would observe but not participate in any combat operations. The Admiral, seeing his coalition fragmenting, made one last attempt to assert authority. He sent a direct message to Admiral: "You cannot win this. Even if you destroy half our fleet, the other half will destroy you. Surrender now and we can negotiate terms." replied with a message that would be quoted for generations afterward. "We didn't come here to win. We came here to draw a line. On one side is everything we'll fight to protect. On the other side is everything we'll burn down if we have to. You get to choose which side you're on." 3 days into the standoff, an unlikely voice proposed a solution. The Million Republic, working with half a dozen smaller species, drafted what they called the Treaty of Terra Nova. It was a comprehensive reform of council procedures, including the return of the contested colonies to human control and the establishment of a real enforcement mechanism with actual authority. The treaty included provisions for military tribunals where the use of force could be justified under specific circumstances, and it created an enforcement division with real power to investigate complaints and punish violations. The revolutionary part was who would staff this enforcement division. The treaty proposed that humanity provide the bulk of combat expertise and training, specifically because they were the only species that still understood military operations. It was a complete inversion of the existing order. The newcomers would teach the elders how to enforce their own laws. The Dominion rejected the treaty immediately, but they were alone in their rejection. Species after species signed on, seeing in the treaty a chance to reform a system that had long ago stopped serving justice. Even some of the major powers, recognizing that their own positions might be threatened by a continued crisis, added their support. The coalition fleet began to disperse. Ships returned to their home systems. Commanders cited technical reasons or political developments or simple pragmatism. Within a week, only the enforcers remained, and they were outnumbered by the human defensive fleet. The admiral claiming victory through their demonstration of council resolve. Everyone knew it was a face-saving lie, but the galaxy was willing to let them have it. The alternative was more bloodshed, and humanity had made it very clear what that would cost. The Treaty of Terra Nova was formally adopted by the Council 3 weeks later. The contested colonies were restored to human control, forces under the supervision of neutral observers, and most significantly, the Council established its enforcement division with Admiral as its first commander. It was a position she didn't want but accepted out of duty. "Someone has to teach you all how to do this," she said at her appointment ceremony. "Someone has to make sure that the next time a species is wronged, they don't have to bring a fleet to get justice." The first class of council enforcement officers included representatives from 40 different species. They trained on human military bases, learned human tactics, studied human history. They learned about the Geneva Conventions and rules of engagement and the careful balance between force and restraint. They learned why humans viewed war as a last resort rather than an impossibility. 6 months after the standoff ended, Ambassador Sarah stood in the observation deck of the new Council enforcement station. It was built in orbit around Terra Nova, one of the recovered colonies, as a symbol of the new order. She watched through the reinforced windows as mixed-species security forces ran training exercises in the space nearby. A young approached her, moving carefully, deferentially. She recognized him as a junior diplomat, one of the new generation being sent out to repair their species' reputation. "Ambassador," he said, his translator rendering his formal tone clearly. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think this will work, this new system, or will it just be the old system with human weapons backing it up?" Sarah considered the question carefully. It was a good question, an honest question from someone genuinely trying to understand what had changed. "My species has a saying," she said. "Si para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. For 3,000 years, your council achieved peace by forgetting how to fight. You created a system where the strong could take what they wanted because the weak had no recourse to force. You thought that was civilization, but it wasn't. It was just tyranny with good public relations." She gestured toward the training exercises. "We kept the memory of violence alive. We maintained our weapons, trained our soldiers, remembered what war costs and why it's necessary. When your council failed us, we roared. We gave a warning that was clear, not that we wanted war, but that we would never be victims again. We forced you to remember what you'd forgotten. The young watched the exercises in silence for a moment. And now you teach us to be like you. No, Sarah said firmly. We teach you to be like us at our best, not our worst. We teach you that force exists, that it can't be wished away, and that it must be controlled by law and conscience. We teach you that peace isn't the absence of weapons. It's the presence of justice backed by the will to defend it. She turned to face him directly. Your generation will decide if this works. You'll decide if the council becomes something better or if it falls back into the old patterns. We gave you the tools. What you build with them is up to you. The young diplomat nodded slowly. Thank you, Ambassador. I think I understand now why the roar was necessary. Sarah smiled slightly. The roar was human, the warning was clear, and the galaxy finally is listening. Let's hope it stays that way. She returned her gaze to the window, watching ships from a dozen species trained together under human instruction, learning to defend a peace that was finally backed by something more than empty words. The Treaty of Terra Nova was just paper, just agreements and protocols. But paper meant nothing without the will to enforce it, and for the first time in 3,000 years, the Council had that will. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had simply reminded it that peace and justice required strength, that civilization required the capacity for violence tempered by the wisdom not to use it unless necessary. They had roared when they needed to, warned when they should have, and fought when they had no other choice. And now they would teach others to do the same, to be guardians of a peace that could defend itself. It wasn't the future Sarah had hoped for when she first arrived at the council, but it was better than the alternative, better than watching the strong prey on the weak while everyone pretended that was order. The roar was human, the warning was clear, and the galaxy would never forget either one.